In recent days, the global news agenda has once again been dominated by a topic long considered one of the most explosive for international security: Iran's nuclear program. Several months have passed since the United States carried out massive airstrikes on a number of nuclear facilities inside the Islamic Republic. Washington then declared the complete destruction of the infrastructure, but doubts arose from the very beginning. Too many details remained unclear. Too little evidence confirmed that the program was truly eliminated. Moreover, according to Israeli analytical centers citing their intelligence sources, literally a day before the bombings, Iranian specialists may have removed all accumulated enriched uranium from the main facilities and dispersed it to secret storage sites. At the time, this was seen as speculation, a guess, but today more and more factors indicate that this guess may have been true. Now, major international media outlets from Financial Times to Haaretz are publishing new information that can no longer be ignored. According to Israeli intelligence Mossad, Iran not only managed to preserve its nuclear program, but has come very close to creating its first atomic bomb. Insiders claim that the timeline is a matter of weeks, if not days. Behind the scenes at the United Nations, diplomatic sources cautiously speak of a critical phase and an irreversible step that Iran may take at any moment. A particularly troubling point. According to the same sources, Russia helped Tehran in the project. A whole group of engineers and specialists were allegedly sent to Iran to advise on centrifuges, enrichment, and storage systems. Official Moscow, of course, denies such accusations, calling them pure propaganda. But Israeli and American circles are convinced that without outside assistance, Iran could not have restored its potential so quickly. What is notable this time is that the reaction of the United States and Israel is very different from previous episodes. In the past, Tel Aviv would prepare strike plans within a day after the first reports of Iranian progress. But today, no loud moves are being made. In the Israeli press, particularly in Jerusalem Post, experts suggest that Netanyahu's government does not rule out manipulation by Tehran. Iran may be deliberately spreading rumors of an almost finished bomb to intimidate the region and create a deterrent effect. This tactic has been used many times in information wars, forcing the enemy to waste resources and nerves on a threat whose reality remains in question. But at the same time, more and more alarming signals point to the opposite, that this is not a bluff. The situation is further complicated by Iran's intensified rhetoric in recent weeks. State television broadcasts footage of new missile tests, which commentators claim can deliver any payload to a distance of more than 2,000 kilometers. And although there is no direct mention of nuclear warheads, the hint is more than obvious. Tehran declares that no power in the world will force Iran to abandon its right to develop peaceful nuclear energy. But behind this slogan, many increasingly see an attempt to legitimize a step toward military use of nuclear technology. According to reports in the New York Times and Washington Post, Washington is now in a state of internal division. Some of Donald Trump's advisors insist on an immediate military response. New strikes, destruction of possible storage sites, a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Others, on the contrary, warn that another attack could provoke an open war across the Middle East. And here we come to the key question: how will Trump respond? The President of the United States likes to project toughness, especially on the eve of elections. But what is at stake is not just image, but global security. Will he decide to launch a large-scale war against a country that, according to some analysts from the Rand Corporation and the Brookings Institution, could acquire nuclear weapons as soon as tomorrow? Or will he prefer to ignore the threat, hoping that it is still an element of Tehran's psychological game? Israel, meanwhile, according to Channel 12, has intensified contacts with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. The goal is to prepare a regional alliance in case Iran really becomes a nuclear power. Behind the scenes, there is talk of a new Middle Eastern crisis that could radically change the balance of power. However, no direct military steps have been taken yet, which for the region looks extremely unusual. Thus, a paradoxical situation is emerging. On the one hand, global intelligence is increasingly voicing Iran's readiness to create a bomb. On the other hand, the key players who usually react instantly are maintaining silence for now. This silence is more alarming than any strikes or sanctions, because it can mean only two scenarios. Either the United States and Israel do not believe in the seriousness of the threat, Or they are preparing something bigger, an operation whose scale and consequences are still impossible to predict. Against the backdrop of these rumors, leaks, and publications, the atmosphere around Iran is becoming increasingly tense. Every new statement by officials, every article in leading Western publications only adds fuel to the fire. And today, when there are fewer and fewer doubts that the Islamic Republic is on the verge of possessing nuclear weapons, the whole world is holding its breath, waiting. Will Donald Trump take the decisive step or limit himself to loud words? And if Iran really announces that it has its first nuclear bomb, this will be a moment that will change the geopolitical landscape forever. Against this background, the role of China should not be underestimated. Beijing officially maintains neutrality, calling for peace and diplomacy, but experts from the South China Morning Post argue that it was China in recent years that became Tehran's key economic lifeline. Through Chinese banks and companies, Iran bypassed sanctions, and through joint energy projects it received billions of dollars, which according to analysts, could have been directed toward financing the nuclear program. And although there is no direct evidence of technology transfer, Washington has no doubt. Without the Chinese factor, it would have been much more difficult for Iran to stay afloat. The scenarios for the development of events look increasingly alarming. If Iran is indeed ready to announce its first bomb, the world has several options. The first is that the United States and Israel carry out a preemptive strike, destroying storage sites and centrifuges. This would immediately lead to war, involving Tehran's allies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shiite groups in Iraq, and possibly even the Houthis in Yemen. The second scenario is that the world tries to accept the situation, as it once did with nuclear Pakistan or North Korea. But in that case, the balance of power in the Middle East would change irreversibly. Saudi Arabia and Turkey would launch their own nuclear programs, opening a new arms race. And the third scenario is a last-minute diplomatic deal, in which Iran agrees to freeze its program in exchange for the lifting of some sanctions. However, as analysts from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace note, trust between the West and Tehran has long been destroyed, and the likelihood of compromise is extremely small. That is why every new publication in Western media, every leak from Mossad or the Pentagon, is perceived as a signal of an approaching crisis. The world is faced with a choice: to believe that Iran is bluffing, or to acknowledge that humanity has reached the threshold of a new nuclear power ready to use this status as a tool of pressure. And the longer Washington and Tel Aviv remain silent, the more questions arise among experts, politicians, and ordinary citizens around the world. It is possible that in the coming weeks we will hear the answer, and that answer will determine the fate of the Middle East for decades to come.